And know that this is actually a relatively small head, so some of the projects that you do, if it's like a full-size human head, obviously it's going to take a lot more. So that's something to be cognizant of. So I'm putting these together, and if you look really closely inside, I don't know if you can zoom in on that or not. You can see where the seams are that are bringing it together, and I'm going to do my best to get those buttered up. It's looking pretty good. All right, so I got them pretty well put together, and now I'm just going to do some spot super gluing here. I'll grab some accelerator. If you don't have accelerator, one neat, really cool trick for isocyanate glues is to use baking soda. And so you'd put a little bit of, you put some glue on, and then you would just put a teaspoon, you know, just heap on the baking soda, and it makes instant plastic. And it's a pretty clever trick. And I should probably be wearing a respirator to do this, but I'm taking a break from my respirator.
And we do have a fan right next to Craig,
and we
blowing
have
out the fumes.
A big open garage door behind, on the other side of me here. So there is actually plenty of ventilation coming through here. One of the things Stan Winston would do was, okay, let that sit for a minute. Stan would invite Cal OSHA to his shop, and they would bring great big bags, like laundry bags, and then you would put on your mask, and they would stick you in this bag, and then they would put this nasty, but it was harmless but nasty smelling chemical in the bag. And so if you had a beard like myself and it leaked through, there's no way you can keep from coughing and hacking and stuff if you breathe this gas. And so this was a test that he would do periodically by inviting the Cal OSHA people over to do tests on us to make sure that our respirators were working correctly. And I'm pretty sure he took great joy in that. So, but safety is so important. I've seen a lot of my colleagues. One guy, he was like one of the #1 sculptors in the business, worked for Rick Baker for a couple of years, and all of a sudden, because of his exposure to all these chemicals, became allergic to everything, and he even had to leave the industry. He became allergic to things like milk and stuff. And it was all due from exposures to stuff that we would do in the early '80s, like using a lot of fiberglass. There was a lot of hot melt vinyl that was going on. I don't know if you guys like the stuff that fishing lures are made of. Is stuff that comes in like a white milky form, and you would heat it up in a double boiler, and it would melt and become hot melt vinyl at about 150 degrees Fahrenheit, but at 160 degrees Fahrenheit it would burn, and at that point it would give off toxic fumes and would make you, and just a couple of whiffs of that would make you very sick. But there was so we really were dealing with a lot of nasty things back then, and it took its toll on a lot of people. So with that cheery note, let's go on a little bit. All right, so I'm gonna just brush some of this along the seam. And
so talk to us about this process and what you're looking for, how much of an overlap, everything.
Well, since we took the fiberglass right up to the edge, all we really need to do is just get them bonded together. And so I'm just putting one layer in there with the resin first, and that should be pretty much enough to keep everything stuck together. It's sort of like a ship in a bottle time for this. All right, so. And if you can't get it all the way, if you run into problems like for instance, this mold is almost impossible to get all the way into that inner mouth. But if you can just get some of the epoxy dripped into that area, you'll be doing okay. You can also, since most of it'll all be bonded together when you take it apart, you can also do some of it after you pull it apart. You can put it back together.
Paul would like to know if you could have waited until after the two halves cured and then bonded them together after with a tape layer on each side, you know, inside and outside.
Yeah, I could have. I could, but I'm relying on the overlapping of these two molds to give me a nice snug fit between the two of them. Yeah, the tighter control that you can maintain on this stuff, the better off your final product is going to be.
Remember, your goal is to preserve the integrity of the art and not distend the art or change the art. That's what everyone signed off on. And if, when it comes to put your underskull in there, it's bulging out oddly, you've ruined the art. So it's really important to get this right.
There's a great story about a classic Hollywood icon movie character. I'm not going to say who it was, and they decided to put mechanisms inside the head, but they didn't have enough room. It was a vacuform head, so they heated up portions of the vacuform head, and they distorted the vacuform just out a little bit in a couple of bumps so that they could get more room for their servos. Unfortunately, the character didn't have any hair or anything like that, so when they put it back together, this character ended up having bumps on the back of his head. And the director was furious.
It looks like James Wright knows the character you're talking about, but we're not going to say it out loud. Can anyone confirm James' suspicions about which character Craig is referring to?
I'll throw you a hint. Okay, I won't hint.
All right, where are we at now, Craig?
All right, so I'm going to go into the lower part of the jaw and butter that up, and then we're good. I'm just getting the lower jaw buttered in here. One thing, here's another idea. You can always thicken up epoxy, and I'm just going to let this sit here so it flows to the bottom. You can use micro balloons or Cabasil and mix it in with your epoxy or polyester resin or whatever to make it more of like a buttery coat. And you could also you could literally like butter this stuff into it to build it up where in places where you may not be able to get the cloth in because of the angle. But I'm not really worried much about that because I know it's all going to be sealed together. So when I take it apart, it's going to be one piece. And if there are any like little gaps there, I can always I can always fix those when I start cutting the head up, because we're going to because obviously we're going to cut out eyes and we're going to cut out the jaws. And once we start cutting those pieces out, we'll be able to get access to those little parts that may not get in their full coating all the way. So it's not really anything to fret about. So that's it. At this point, I'm just going to let this cure for the next 24 hours before pulling it apart. And you definitely will end up most likely destroying this plaster Band-Aid mold, taking it apart. After that, I will take some 120 grit sandpaper and I'll do a little bit of sanding on it to sand down any of the little bumps. And then I'll follow that up with some 400 grit sandpaper just to make it a little bit smoother in the places where it may not be smooth. And that's kind of where we're at now. So we're just going to let it sit here and come back in 24 hours.